Up next is our panel on LGBTIQA+ in the media industry. Wave the rainbow flag, but for real. It's meant to be a candid and an open conversation about the LGBTIQA+ coverage in the mainstream media and the role of the LGBTIQA+ journalists in the newsrooms. Leading this conversation is Rachel Savage, LGBT+ correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, Marco Albertini, editor-in-chief of Pridemagazine.it, Zsolt Erdei, CEO of the Hungarian media Humen and Pink Budapest, and Nicky Bandini, freelance sports writer and broadcaster specializing in European football and the NFL. Thank you all for being here today and looking forward to this conversation. Rachel, it's all yours.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you to the EJC. So welcome, everybody. It's really great to be here for a panel discussion about, and I'm going to use LGBT+ just because that's the acronym I'm used to, so I'll trip myself up if I use a different one. But we're going to start with looking at how the so-called mainstream media in Europe covers LGBT+ issues. So Zsolt, I'd like to come to you first because Hungary has kind of been, in the headlines a lot this year because of LGBT+ issues. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how Hungarian mainstream media and actually European media as a whole, how you feel they've been covering LGBT+ issues. Have they been fair? Have they been accurate? Have they been, discriminatory, not discriminatory?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Zsolt Erdei from the Humen Media Group and the Pink Budapest, the Human Travel Tourism Association. I'm a CEO and the founder of the association and the Human Media as well. So the question is interesting now in Hungary because if we see the news every day, every day we can see one or two or more LGBTQ topics in the Hungarian mainstream media. Is it good or no? This is the question. Yes, it's good because the Hungarian media can show more about the LGBTQ life now, but it's not good because we had a law, and after the law we had so many problems with this law and with this situation. But I always start my conversation about one important thing. The government, the people didn't change in Hungary. People still open in Hungary, open in Budapest. The communication of government is different, but the people are different in Hungary. And this is the most important thing. And if you see the news in the social media, for example, if the online magazine posted a news about the LGBTQ topics, and you can see, I don't like to read the comments, but you can see there are more positive comments than negative. And day by day, there will be more and more positive comments than negative. I have a personal story because my father doesn't like to talk about LGBTQ topics. Nothing. He doesn't like to talk about my life, my work, nothing. And on today's Saturday, on Tuesday, I talked with him. He called me, and first time we talked about my job, and he told me, "You have to do it because it's a good thing." And I think so many heterosexual straight people follow to your magazine and to your channel and everything. And he told me, this is a good business, I think.
So that's good to hear, because we get a lot of negative headlines coming out of Hungary, so it's nice to hear some positive news as well. Marco, what's the situation like when it comes to the coverage of LGBT plus issues in Italy? And I know Nicky might have some opinions on this as well, but if you just want to start, Marco.
Yeah, I have a number that I can tell you. And in Italy, the Association Diversity, together with the University of Pavia, and they make every year a survey about how the most important newscasts cover 5 different diversities, so like age, disability, and women, and also LGBT, of course. So during 2020, from January to December, they scrutinized a total of 42,953 news in total. LGBT news were only 102, which is 0.2% of the total. So I would say that our voices, let's say in the mainstream media, are totally underrepresented, like if we were non-existent. In Italian, you can use an euphemism. In Italian, it's called benaltrismo. It means that any other thing is more important. So the question is that if you don't talk about something, it does not exist. And also what I think is that the narratives or the storytelling on our issues are not under our control. And I see this as a big problem, because as I see it as a kind of a new colonialism with an updated equivalent of a colonial damage. It means we include you, we talk about you sometimes, but we not as you really are. And the contents are tailored to be friendly, let's say, but not accurate. And so who really cares about talking about our own diversities? I think it's a paradox. It's a kind of new marginalization on the basis of inclusion. I would like to send this kind of controversial message.
No, that's definitely useful to talk about, because, visibility can be a kind of sometimes a two-way, a double-edged sword, as it were. Nicky, what's your take on this? If you want to sort of talk a little bit about Italian media as well, that'd be great. But also do tell us about what you think about the representation of LGBT plus issues in the UK media.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear Marco talk about the perspective from Italy. Of course, I do cover Italian football, so I have a certain perspective on it, but a very different one, I'm certain, to Marco's living in Italy and covering specifically LGBT issues. And I think what he said really chimes with my experience consuming Italian media and also talking within sport to people, which is, I think there's still much more of a culture around Italian sport with sexuality, certainly, of don't ask, don't tell. We just don't talk about it. It's something that is kept out. Whereas I do think that in British media, not just in sport, I think we have a very different reality when it comes to LGBT issues. And I think it's still a multi-faced reality sometimes. I think that to sort of, again, to stick within my area, which is sports journalism, I think that there is a great warmth and enthusiasm for personal stories. People are very happy to talk about individuals and their happy relationships, their happy experiences coming out, and the things that they've been able to achieve since coming out, and the ways in which they feel their lives have improved where they have. And I think there's still a sort of gap between that, for instance, and then first of all, the sort of areas where there aren't still out athletes. I think, for instance, men's football remains this area where we haven't had any high profile, certainly top league players coming out across European football. And sometimes there's while there's a genuine sort of desire amongst, I think, a lot of the LGBT plus community to see people feel able to come out and to do that, there's also this sort of accompanying slight salaciousness, I think, from parts of the tabloid media in the UK. It's probably quite off-putting to people who might be in that position and might considering coming out, because the way that these topics get talked about, you know, to use an English phrase, is a sort of curtain twitching, look what the neighbours are doing about it, which I think is sometimes, it's not hostile, but it still makes this thing out to be something different in a way that is, I can't quite find the right word for it, but something that would be to talk about. And I think there's a really fascinating contrast with, for instance, the first NFL player, Carl Nassib, who came out as gay in America, and the way that he was able to tell his story in such a off-the-cuff and understated way on social media, where it was a quick video he posted on his social channel saying, oh, hey, you know, by the way, I'm gay. And that's, you know, kind of the end of that conversation. I think we haven't got all the way there in the British media with certainly the men's sports in particular. I think it's a very different picture again in women's sports and men's sports. And then I think there's a third element in the UK media, which is I think that there is still a degree to which gay issues and trans issues are treated separately. And I think that there's been a really uncomfortable trend in the last couple of years. Trans issues are getting much more prominence. There are some a sort of ongoing back and forths that feel very circular in how they're discussed, that are presented constantly in this manner of a debate, which is a very uncomfortable way to discuss issues that affect people's real lives, whether or not they're being debated as allowed to exist in public spaces. And on top of that, I find that those issues are frequently, you can see in sections of the British media, and this is less about sport, more broadly, what really makes these stories really uncomfortable, I think, is how often you see a whole month's worth of coverage from newspapers covering stories every day sometimes without including a single trans voice in their coverage. I think that's a really astonishing element of some of the coverage in the UK, is how the stories are sometimes being told by people who are not affected at all by the story.
And I think that's a good place to kind of ask a little bit about then the role of LGBT journalists in the media industry, because we'll come to LGBT specific media in a bit, Zsolt and Marco, but be really interested to get your thoughts on, do we need LGBT journalists covering LGBT issues for the mainstream media? Do we kind of need that active hiring? But then again, LGBT journalists, should we be allowed to just cover whatever we want, be a football journalists, or, I used to be based in Africa covering sort of economics and politics. Zsolt, when it comes to sort of Hungarian media or coverage of Hungarian LGBT issues, do you think that it would be better for there to be more LGBT journalists covering those, or are you kind of happy with how things are going at the moment?
In Hungary, there isn't so many LGBTQ journalists. Of course, we work with LGBTQ journalists in Humen media, but it's important for us because we work with the straight journalists as well, because in our magazine, in the printed magazine, it's a monthly magazine. We have 22, 23 articles in a month in the magazine, and we work with more than 13 journalists, not only 3 or 4. And I think it's really good because we can do the magazine with the different eyes, and in the Hungarian mainstream media, there are some LGBTQ journalists, but not a lot, or we don't know. They are. We don't know about their sexual orientation. But I think, for example, my colleague Adam, he's a really good journalist, and he started his work at Humen Media, and then he started to write articles for the other mainstream media as well. And the first time when he told me he wants to write to the other media about LGBTQ topics, LGBTQ issues, I didn't like it. but after that, I realized this is a really good thing if the LGBTQ journalists write about the LGBTQ life in the mainstream media, because they can study to the people, to the Hungarian people, and I think in Hungary there are more influencers, vloggers, LGBTQ vloggers in the mainstream media, or they have own channel, and they are LGBTQ people, and it's really good because they have so many followers, audiences, and it's good for represent the Hungarian LGBTQ community.
Sure. I think having your own platforms, and we'll come to discuss you and Marco's publications in a minute. That's definitely kind of one solution, as it were, to the media landscape. But Nicky, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on sort of should it be LGBT journalists covering LGBT issues, and how do we kind of not pigeonhole queer journalists into only covering queer issues?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and not a straightforward one, because I still think one of the most uncomfortable moments I've had in a newsroom was one of my early days as a journalist. I was working with a colleague who is gay, and a conversation topic came up about a certain issue. I think it was actually about Premier League footballers and whether it would be possible for a Premier League footballer to come out as gay. And an editor pointed at her directly with his finger, pointed at her in the middle of the newsroom and said, so-and-so, I won't use their name, but so you're gay, what do you think about this? And I thought that was such a confrontational and inappropriate way to ask someone in the middle of a newsroom, who I don't even know if they wanted sort of their sexuality to be a thing that was talked about amongst sort of everyone in the newsroom. And so there's sort of this competing thing that I think a lot of us have going on, and that I have going on. I have a career in journalism, which is as a football journalist. That's what I've sort of started out doing. It's what I'm still doing, and it's what I have my sort of main career driving towards. And I don't necessarily want to stop doing that just to talk about LGBT issues, because I am LGBT. But at the same time, I get very frustrated when I read, like I say, certain topics in the media, certain topics that journalists who aren't LGBT plus will cover for months on end without including voices from the LGBT plus community. So I think there's sort of both things within me of sort of wanting everyone. And I think that's such an important foundation stone of equality that we all want, is we all want the freedom to live the lives we want, to follow the pursuits and interests that we have. But at the same time, I think it's hugely important that there are journalists who are LGBT plus, who are covering these topics, because otherwise our voices are not represented in those stories.
Yeah, those are really, really good points, Nicky. Zsolt, do you think, in a country like Hungary, but just in general in Europe, do you think that having LGBT specific media is still sort of necessary and important, especially, if you've got sort of YouTube channels and, Instagram accounts where these influencers are sort of sharing their stories? Do you still kind of need a specific news website, specific news magazine for LGBT plus people?
So my answer is definitely yes, because for example, for LGBTQI people, the LGBTQI media, magazines, bloggers, vlogs, influencers, everything can help to the younger generation. They can get information about the LGBTQ life. They can get, read articles about everything about the LGBTQ life, like LGBTQ life, drag life, or lifestyle, culture, history, everything. We have in our magazine, we have so many different topics, so many different articles in every month, and in the news portal at Humen Online as well, every day. And I think LGBTQ media can help to accept themselves for the younger generation. We got so many comments, emails from them, and they wrote we could help them to accept themselves. So the other thing, if you see the LGBTQ news at the LGBTQ news portal, or if you open the LGBTQ magazine, you can get the information about the LGBTQ life. Only LGBTQ life. If you see the mainstream media, you can get the information, everything about life. And the other thing, in the Humen magazine and the Humen Online, we had so many straight readers and followers. And for us, it's a really good thing, because so many Hungarian straight people follow us and support us as well. And we got emails and comments as well from them. They can, with our articles and interviews, they can get more information about LGBTQ life. And it's really important because they can get more information, and they can understand the LGBT.
Sure. Marco, do you feel like this is a similar landscape in Italy when it comes to LGBT plus media, that there's still a role for it, and it also has a role?
Yeah, because in general, any kind of LGBT media, they are affirming spaces. They give empowerment. I mean, we are not just sexual orientations or gender identities or expressions. We are a culture. We have an heritage, and we have to protect and to pass on to the next generations. And also, we show ourselves as we want. For instance, in lesbian magazines, women are not sexualized. In the covers of our magazines, you can really see the diversity, the differences. You can send messages. So that's why we are still incredibly important, both for ourselves and also for, let's say, the other world. And it's definitely, I hope that it's not easy for printed magazines, but we have to keep on striving and surviving.
And something we spoke about, slightly different topic now, but something we spoke about previously is how kind of certain events or certain sort of straight people raising LGBT issues and sort of suddenly like catapulted into the mainstream. So we'll use the example of the Euros, because, that's a topic I think, some of us have expertise on, but how, there were a lot of debates over, whether there should be protests about Hungarian LGBT issues at the Euros, and this suddenly sort of created a huge discussion. And this was sort of very much driven by mainstream sort of straight media, as it were. Nicky, what did you think about how there was a lot of discussions around LGBT plus issues around the Euros?
Yeah, it certainly got centered, and it wasn't just journalists. I think what most journalists are doing, certainly football journalists, if we're covering football issues, is we're covering what's happening on and around the pitch. But when a player like Leon Goretzka gives the heart gesture to the Hungarian fans who'd been giving a homophobic abuse during a football game, and when there's been a big discussion in the days around that football game about whether or not stadiums in Germany can be lit up with the rainbow flag, it really centers the story in a way that actually is unavoidable. It means that you're going to talk about this issue. And I think that we saw really vocal support actually from football players for more than one different country. I mean, the other one who's in my head right now is Jordan Henderson of the England squad, who tweeted a supportive message when a football fan coming to watch an England game at Wembley, who was non-binary, said it was their first time coming to watch a game as a non-binary person who was out and presenting in a sort of obviously, I suppose, what they would define as an obviously queer way. And they, that being celebrated by an England international footballer and centered, I think when you put that together with the other sort of very visible demonstration that was going on through the Euros, which was the kneeling before kickoff for racial equality, I think those things actually really centered social issues, not just in a footballing conversation, but because Euro 2020 is such a cultural moment all across Europe, it probably centered these conversations in a lot of countries, certainly in England, as conversations even for people who weren't really that interested in the football. So I think it's certainly made clear this summer that athletes, probably for better or worse, because not every athlete necessarily is going to have the same opinion on different issues, but athletes do have this tremendous power to put our attention on certain topics if they choose to.
And Zsolt, how did you feel about all these footballers who, probably majority straight, but at least, presenting straight, all these footballers, and then the media covering them, bringing attention to, the LGBT law in Hungary, that for anyone who doesn't know, sort of banning content from being shown to children. So Zsolt, did it make you feel kind of seeing all this being covered in the media?
So this situation is really shame and bad, and because in this year during the Euro 2020 we could read in the news about the Hungarian fans' habit. I think everything is because the current situation, because the Euro 2020 started in June. The Hungarian laws, the new Hungarian homophobic laws, came in June. In the same time, the Euro 2020, and if we see the football match in 2019 in Hungary, nobody talked or showed about nothing homophobic, nothing about the homophobic content. And now these people feel, oh, we can do everything. We can hate LGBTQ people because the government said it. This is the main problem. But in few weeks before we had a campaign in this year. It's called Family's Family, and the Hungarian footballer Gulacsi, he supported this campaign, and he supported the rainbow families in Hungary. And then he got so many homophobic comments, and the president of the Hungarian Football Association told I think he had an interview, I don't remember clearly, and he said, the sexual orientation is not the topic in the football. We are really welcome straight LGBTQ people, everybody at the football match, at the football. And I'm really surprised that he talked that, because wow, it's a really good thing from the president of the Hungarian Football Association.
But we need to kind of get on to the Q&A section, Zsolt. So if you could just kind of wrap up here, if that's okay.
Okay, I finished.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Marco, I just want to finish off with you before we go on to the Q&A. And actually, all four of us can give some sort of positive solutions for newsrooms around Europe to address LGBT issues. But I guess just very quickly, Marco, do you think that we still need sort of straight allies to get LGBT issues positive attention in the media?
Yes, we do. And because you must be committed to diversity, you need a credibility. And if you want to talk about, let's say, normality, yes, we need more people that talk about us being competent. We cannot be only stereotypes, because stereotypes weaken us. And it's still a fight for legitimacy. So, in a way, straight people, but especially straight men, need not. So yes, we need constant necessary vigilance, and the more we can talk about our issues, or let's talk about our issues properly, the better it will be for everybody.
And so what people who run newsrooms, editors, managers, what would you say, what would be your top piece of advice for them for better covering LGBT issues, better including LGBT journalists?
Yeah. If possible, to not be afraid to hire LGBT plus journalists and give more space, not only just in June to talk about the Pride Month, or if some kind of LGBT related laws should pass. We really need a broader and more constant and a broader narratives about our lives, not only just about our lifestyles, about our culture, about our history, and so on.
Sure. Zsolt, what's your key piece of positive advice for editors in mainstream media for better covering LGBT issues?
In Hungary.
All over Europe, but
because I think talk more about LGBTQ people, more talk about LGBTQ life. It's the most important thing now in Europe, in the world, and in Hungary as well, focusing to the LGBTQ topics, because people don't know enough information.
Mm-hmm. And Nicky, what's your key piece of advice?
I think the things that seem important to me, first of all, as I sort of touched on, I think certainly allowing LGBT plus people to have voices in LGBT plus stories is a hugely important thing. I think for the same reasons I said before, I would love for editors to be sensitive about how they approach that. You can have a conversation with someone asking if they want to talk about a story without pointing at someone in the middle of a newsroom and outing them in a way that I saw happen in that one situation. I think the other thing that I would really love to see in the British way these things are covered is less drive towards these topics as a debate. I think we have this addiction to debate stories, not just in the LGBT area, but in all areas of journalism, because those drive clicks, and clicks are what so many people are chasing in the sort of modern online environment. But I think if we present everything, and certainly LGBT lives and existence, as a debate, then that creates space for there to be hostility, because there's always going to be the negative side of a debate. And I think that less of that and more of allowing people to just tell their stories would be a benefit to everyone.
Thanks, Nicky. And just before Q&A, my piece of advice would be, don't be afraid to ask questions. Obviously, don't be aggressive, don't be kind of, but if you're genuinely asking questions in a sensitive, open, way to somebody who is openly LGBT or an LGBT organization, then I think that's a good way to kind of learn about the issues, as long as it's kind of done with an open mind.
Thank you, Rachel, Marco, Zsolt, and Nicky for this amazing conversation. Again, in the chat, we have participants sharing experiences, sharing challenges, and most importantly, sharing also alternatives and solutions. So thank you very much for this. And I will start this conversation with a question from Misia. How can we get to a place where LGBT plus journalists are acknowledged and represented without being solely defined by their sexual orientation?
Who would like to take this? Anyone feel free to jump in. Nicky, yeah?
Oh, no, I'm not muted. I mean, I think this is a really sort of personal question to me. Like I really feel this question, and I know because when I came out, came out and transitioned very publicly because I had to, because I already had a public profile as a journalist before I made that step in my life. And so it was really important to me that I would continue to be acknowledged as who I am as a journalist, apart from this, fact of who I am. And, for me, I made a very deliberate step of writing one story, sort of introducing the fact that I was making this transition, and then basically refused to talk about it to anyone in any interviews for more than a year, because I didn't want that to be my story. I think that the thing that I would say is some editors are more or less pushy on that sort of thing. And I think that I was very lucky with my most sort of important editors. I'm freelance. I don't have one employer, that my sort of biggest employers were quite happy to let me tell my story my way. And I think that is probably what we should all want from our editors. If we're going to tell these stories that are personal, that they let us tell them our way, and then get on with doing the things that we're good at. And I think that I don't know if that's enough for a system, but I do think it's really important. And speaking again, just personally, the thing I'm trying to do towards that end is just to do my job and to do it well. And yes, come here into a space I think is appropriate to talk about these things and do that sometimes. But most of my days are still spent covering football, because that's my job.
Thank you, Nicky, for this answer. Now we have another question. How do you tackle the news regarding LGBT plus community hate crimes in your respective countries?
Marco, given that Italy is debating a hate crimes law, I think this might be an interesting question for you.
Yes, unfortunately, these news do not go a lot on the mainstream. There is a gay journalist, his name is Simone Alliva, who wrote 1 year ago, he wrote a book about LGBT hate crimes in Italy, and he still tries to cover it. And he was also capable of having the cover of a very important weekly magazine, but it was just a one-off. So it's still again, if it's not talk about it, it doesn't exist. So they just try to put everything undercover. It's terrible. Mainstream media talk more about, and it's horrible, of course, about attacks on women, but it's very, very rare that we see news and about attacks on LGBT plus people in Italy, and there are really very awful situations. So we try to talk about it in our circles, so that can be like on Twitter, on social media, but it's a discussion that stays inside our community. It's not easy to make it feel like it's a real problem in Italy. And also this is not helping to have this law against homotransphobia, misogynism and ableism that is stuck in the Italian parliament.
Thank you for your answer. And I think we have time for one last question from Francesco. Seeing how Nicky covers the NFL, I wonder if she sees the way USA sports are focusing more on representing the community. You can play project translated to the European sports scene as well.
I think there's already happening to some extent. I do think that when you look at how top level football clubs, soccer clubs conduct their social media and approach these things, it's actually very similar now to how professional sports franchises in America do, the NFL, the NBA. I think there's sort of shared learning that's going on about how to sort of approach these issues publicly, but there's still certainly a lot of scope for governing bodies to follow their lead and to start doing things that is a bit more proactive than just sort of lip service on social media. And I think that is probably where football has this slightly greater challenge, because football is an international sport, and because when you start talking about the big governing bodies like UEFA or FIFA, they are working with different realities in different countries, which we've touched on even today with the differences between the media landscape in England and Italy and Hungary, and I'm certain different again across many different countries in Europe. So I think that there are some lessons that can be learned. I think some of those lessons are being learned, and perhaps again it's just inevitable, not desirable but inevitable, that these things happen a bit differently in a continent that is many countries than a big sort of single nation like America.
Thank you all again for this amazing conversation and for giving us a little bit of hope that things are going to improve. So now it's time to go back to the studio. Vera, Angie.
Thank you so much, Rachel, Zsolt, Marco, and Nicky. Thank you really for being here today at this News Impact Summit on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.